Have you ever known of an obscure model of a locomotive you really would like to have in your collection, but the model has a questionable reputation? Well, inside this massive and pretentious wooden box is just such a locomotive for me. We'll get to the locomotive in a moment, but first, let's look at this box. For reference, here is a 6-inch ruler. This box is considerably bigger than the one the Rapido train's Empress model came in. Opening the box up, the top flap reaches so high it wouldn't clear my workbench light. And here is our first sign of trouble, a certificate of authenticity. As long as I've been involved with model railroading, I have yet to see a case where a certificate of authenticity came with an outstanding model. The models that come with certificates are always mediocre or worse. Now for the locomotive itself. The engine and tender are in pretty standard clamshell packaging. The plugs for the connections between the engine and tender are located in the tender, behind this sprung diaphragm. That certainly won't be a headache. My model was second-hand, so I'm not sure how long some defects have been present. The cab was all cattywampus, though. Some parts were misaligned and spreading it out in weird ways. It took some fiddling, pushing, pulling, and prying, but I got it back where it's supposed to be. While I was doing that, one of the eccentric cranks fell out of the main driving wheel. Fantastic, but not unexpected. I pushed the crank back into place for the time being, but I will look at a more permanent fix later on. With the plugs and wires being so incredibly awkward to get at, I'll just put her on the track for an initial look over and the beginning of the history lesson on these engines. True Line Trains was a subset within a Canadian hobby company in much the same way Athearn is a subset within Horizon Hobby. They had done a number of Canadian and American models of diesel locomotives and freight cars, and were looking to do a steam locomotive. Thus, the first installment in the Platinum series was announced in 2007. That was the Canadian National U2g Northern. The U2g was to be a highly detailed, mind-blowing locomotive with an equally mind-blowing retail price. 1,200 Canadian dollars. This would be a limited run of 1,000 models, 100 each of the 10 offered road numbers. The entire production run sold out almost immediately. An agreement was reached with Rapido Trains for the U2g to be produced in the same factory that Rapido used. The original release date was expected to be in 2008, but it was delayed numerous times for a variety of reasons. Now let's turn it around, and the handrail is loose on this side. A little fiddling and I'll get that in place. Now, where was I? The first 200 models were produced and delivered to True Line Trains' office in Canada, but inspections of the models showed horrible running problems, among other things. All 200 went back to the factory, and both the man in charge of True Line Trains and the president of Rapido Trains, Jason Schron, traveled to the factory in China to investigate exactly what happened. This is where they discovered that the factory workers did not understand what quality control was. Thus, some more training was arranged for the workforce. The 200 models were run back through the factory and shipped back to Canada before being sent out to dealers and customers. This was in early 2011. Now we can take a look at the other side here and continue our story. Once modelers began to receive their engines, however, problems emerged. The pulling power of the engines was lackluster, with some struggling to pull 6 boxcars up a 2% grade. This may have been due to the weight of the engine being equal to, if not slightly less than that of the tender. The blind main driving wheel, which was added to allow the model to negotiate tighter curves, didn't touch the track, effectively making the engine a 464. The engines had a knack for finding every imperfection in a layout's track work. Some models were simply broken out of the box, and various other defects were reported. Word got onto model railroad web forums, and many people elected to cancel their orders. Well, let's see how the old QSI decoder behaves. No more avoiding it. I've got to plug the engine and tender together. This will be fun. Now, where was I? Many engines were either returned outright or came back to True Line Trains for servicing. The staff at TLT decided to check and test every engine they received from the factory before sending it out. The rest of the 1,000 engines were eventually sent out, but problems continued to plague them. Some people received the engines and really liked them. Others received one that didn't run correctly, exchanged it for another one, and still had issues. Word about the U2g's problems continued to spread, and what had been a sold-out success eventually became an inventory problem for dealers. The prices dropped lower and lower, until eventually, a True Line Trains U2g could be bought new for $300 to $400, a full 66% less than the original MSRP. True Line Trains did what they could, servicing the engines where possible for customers. In some cases, TLT outright replaced defective engines. True Line Trains continued producing models for several more years, but never did produce another steam locomotive. Eventually, the parent company chose to pursue other hobby product avenues and shut down their model train production. This was the end of True Line Trains. Some people have claimed that you can still find a handful of U2gs for sale at some hobby shops, reportedly as new old stock for the original retail price. Beyond that, the engines crop up for sale on second-hand train sites and eBay every now and then. That's the abridged version of the story, at least as best I've been able to determine looking around model railroad web forums. Now to fire her up and hear that glorious quantum sound system. Track power on. I think my live reaction at that moment sums it up.
Well, that sounded wonderful.
I pulled the engine off the track and checked to be sure I actually had the plugs in correctly. Once I verified that I did, I tried again. Still no luck. While I was looking the engine over again, the U2g decided to show me another one of its party tricks. A couple little adjustments later, I tried once again on DCC track power.
And we got track power.
For the record, that sound is coming from the speakers and is very loud. At this point, I decided to poke around the bottom of the engine with a meter in search of a short circuit, but I didn't find one. So where does that leave me? Well, my goals for this engine were to take some unnecessary components out, add some weight, make it operable, and maybe later replace the decoder. Now it seems replacing the decoder has become priority 1. I had in mind to eventually put a LokeSound 5 decoder in here, but seeing as the existing decoder appears to be dead on arrival, I think I will just replace the decoder board with a 21-pin motherboard and use whatever decoders I have available for the time being. As far as the first look, this is as far as I went on night 1. At least once I put one of the sand domes and the turret cover back on. Fast forwarding a little, on another night I found myself fiddling with the tender to see if I could get it open. I got partway there before I realized I was starting to make progress and should probably have the camera rolling. The coal load came out with a little prying, and 2 screws in the front of the tender allowed the coal bunker to come away from the body. But 2 detail parts underneath had been glued in place and were holding the coal bunker to the car body. I was hoping to find a way to free them, but alas, no such luck. The glue may have been done by a previous owner instead of by True Line Trains, as other detail parts just slid out and were not glued down. Ultimately, I had to cut the detail pieces. They're not in a place where they'll be easily noticeable anyways. The front of the tender is still attached to the clip-in tender bogies by chains, but I can at least get it out of the way enough to work. There's the decoder. Just to see if the issue is in the engine, I placed the tender on the track and gave it power for a moment. Yep, that confirms it. The issue is in the tender. I believe it's the decoder itself. I'd already tried CV8 to 8 as a reset, no change. QSI decoders are not known for their reliability. Now to see if I can get it out. This took a significant amount of fiddling, as I had to free the weight from the tender, which was held in by a screw, and then had to work the weight with the decoder screwed on all around until I could get it to slide out of the tender. Once I had the decoder in the clear, I undid the screws and unplugged the wires. Well, there's the decoder. At this point, I have to wait for a new motherboard to come in the mail, so I boxed the tender pieces together, keeping the screws in little bags, and set her aside awaiting the arrival of more parts. Right about now, I'm wondering, what have I gotten myself into? Maybe FedEx leaving this thing in the neighbor's driveway was a sign. Regardless, I'm in it now. This will conclude Part 1. As more progress occurs, I will post more videos in what will likely be a series. Like I said in the preview, I don't know for sure if I'll be able to get her running, but I am going to give it the best shot I can, and will bring you along for the ride. Stay safe, stay tuned.